You know that feeling when your grocery bill keeps getting bigger, but your paycheck stays the same? That's exactly what set the stage for one of the most remarkable political comebacks in American history. Remember when filling up your gas tank felt like emptying your wallet? Well, you weren't alone. The story of Donald Trump's return to the White House in 2024 begins right there at the kitchen table, where millions of Americans struggled with rising prices. But how did economic worries turn into such a powerful political force? Here's the fascinating part. Even after inflation started cooling down, prices stayed high. It's like climbing a mountain. Getting to the top is one thing, but those prices, they never came back down. Think about this. When Republican pollster John McHenry said people voted with their pocketbooks, he wasn't just throwing out a catchy phrase. He was describing a tidal wave of frustration that would reshape American politics. While Harris talked about protecting democracy, Trump zeroed in on something more immediate: the cost of living. And oh boy, did that message hit home. But here's where it gets really interesting. Trump's economic message wasn't just about complaints. He painted a picture of what he called Trump's America 2.0, promising not just to fix inflation, but to bring back the economic boom times of his first term. Remember those pre-COVID days when the economy was roaring? Trump sure made sure voters did. Now, let's talk about what might have been the biggest game changer in his election: immigration. Have you noticed how the border crisis stopped being just a southern state's problem? When even Democratic mayors started sounding the alarm, you knew something big was shifting. Close your eyes and imagine Trump at Madison Square Garden, right in the heart of New York City, talking about border security. 10 years ago, that would have seemed crazy, right? But in 2024, it struck a chord even in deep blue territory. Why? Because the border crisis had gone national. When cities like Chicago and New York started struggling with migrant issues, Trump's message about securing our borders suddenly meant something different to urban voters. But here's the twist that really changed everything. Trump managed to connect the dots between the border crisis and economic struggles. He asked voters a simple question: how can we take care of American families when we're spending billions on illegal immigration? It wasn't just about border security anymore, it was about American priorities. The numbers tell the story. Democratic governors and mayors publicly criticizing their own party's border policies, that was unprecedented. And when Trump promised the strongest economy, the most secure borders, and safest cities, he wasn't just speaking to his base anymore. He was speaking to worried parents in suburban Chicago, small business owners in New York City, and working-class families in Michigan. Now, this is where things get really wild. Remember when everyone thought Trump's legal troubles would sink him? Plot twist, they did exactly the opposite. But how? Let's break down what might be the most brilliant campaign strategy flip we've ever seen. First up, who would have thought that having multiple indictments would actually help someone win an election? Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Trump's team, led by the dynamic duo of Chris LaCivita and Susie Wills, pulled off something incredible. They turned what looked like political kryptonite into pure gold. They took every indictment and spun it into a story about a fighter standing up against a system that many Americans had grown to distrust. But here's the real kicker. Trump's campaign went way beyond his traditional playbook. Remember when he showed up on Joe Rogan's podcast? That wasn't just another interview, it was a masterclass in reaching young male voters. And when 18-year-old Barron Trump helped shape the campaign's digital strategy, that wasn't just nepotism, it was a direct line to Gen Z voters. The campaign got creative in ways nobody expected. Trump on TikTok? Check. Photo ops at McDonald's? You bet. Even that moment when he jumped into a garbage truck wearing an orange vest after Biden's garbage comment about his supporters, pure political theater that regular folks ate up. Let's not forget the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania. When Trump stood there, blood on his face, shouting, "Fight, fight, fight," it wasn't just dramatic, it was transformative. For many voters, it changed the narrative from controversial politician to fearless leader willing to die for his beliefs. Through it all, one thing became clear: this wasn't the same old Trump campaign. It was smarter, more disciplined, and incredibly effective at turning every potential weakness into a strength. Who could have predicted that a 77-year-old former president would end up dominating social media and youth culture? Speaking of unexpected turns, let's dive into what many political experts now call the Great Democratic Disconnect of 2024. Remember when everyone thought that Democrats had a winning formula? Well, sometimes the best laid plans fall apart in the most surprising ways. Here's where things got really complicated for the Democrats. Imagine trying to run a presidential campaign with just 100 days on the clock. That's exactly what Kamala Harris faced after Biden stepped aside. Talk about being thrown into the deep end. But timing wasn't the only challenge. It was like watching a perfect storm gather strength. You might be wondering, how does a major political party lose its way so dramatically? Well, picture this. While Americans were worrying about paying their bills, Democratic strategists were focusing on what many voters saw as abstract issues. It's like showing up to a house fire with a book about fire safety. Technically relevant, but not exactly what people needed at that moment. Let's break it down. Harris, who many saw as the border czar, barely addressed the immigration crisis during her campaign. Think about that for a second. It's like being the captain of a ship and not mentioning the iceberg straight ahead. When she finally did speak about her vision for America, it often felt more like a list of complaints about Trump than a clear plan for the future. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Democrats made a classic political mistake. They assumed their traditional base would stick with them no matter what. Remember when Biden appeared to call Trump supporters garbage? That single moment became a gift to the Trump campaign that kept on giving. Here's where the story takes an even more dramatic turn. While Americans were wrestling with their grocery bills, two major wars were raging across the globe, and Trump knew exactly how to use this to his advantage. Think about these numbers for a moment. $175 billion to Ukraine through 5 different bills, plus another $22 billion to help Israel fight their war since October 2023. That's not just government spending, that's enough money to make anyone's head spin. Trump didn't miss a beat. At every rally, he'd point to these conflicts and ask one simple question. How can they send billions overseas while you can't afford to fill up your gas tank? It was like watching a master chess player set up the perfect move. Every time Harris talked about international stability, Trump countered with kitchen table economics. But here's what made it really stick. Trump wasn't just criticizing, he was connecting dots. He painted a picture of a Democratic leadership that seemed more focused on faraway conflicts than on struggles at home. And in a time when many Americans were counting pennies at the checkout counter, that message hit home like a thunderbolt. Now, let's talk about what might have been the turning point of the entire campaign. Picture this. Harris is sitting on The View. The cameras are rolling, and she's asked one simple question. What would she do differently from Biden? What happened next became the stuff of political legend. Her struggle to answer that question, Trump and his running mate Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio turned it into political gold. At rally after rally, they would reenact that moment, and each time you could feel the energy in the crowd shift. It wasn't just a gaffe anymore, it had become a symbol of what many voters saw as a broader problem with the Democratic campaign. Here's where things get really interesting. Remember when everyone thought abortion rights would be the Democrats' winning card? Well, sometimes even the strongest cards can't win the game when people are playing at a different table altogether. The truth is, while Democratic strategists were banking on social issues to carry the day, most Americans were sitting at their kitchen tables trying to figure out how to make ends meet. It's like trying to sell someone a luxury car when they're worried about paying their rent. The timing just wasn't right. Now, hold on to your seats because this is where the story takes another fascinating turn. Remember the term woke culture? Well, it ended up playing a much bigger role in this election than anyone could have predicted. Here's the thing about cultural battles. They can energize your base, but they can also alienate the very people you need to win elections. As former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie pointed out, while Democrats were focused on pronouns and DEI initiatives, many Americans were struggling to pay their rent. It's like trying to have a philosophical debate with someone who's worried about putting food on the table. The timing just doesn't work. The numbers tell a striking story. Harris actually lost ground with key Democratic constituencies compared to Biden's performance. Female voters? Down 3 points. Latino voters? Down 5 points. But the real shocker came from young Black and Hispanic men. When 30% of Black men under 45 vote Republican, you know something fundamental has shifted in American politics. Think about this. Trump's appearances on podcasts like Joe Rogan's show weren't just random media hits. They were part of a carefully crafted strategy to reach young male voters. And it worked brilliantly. A whopping 49% of men aged 18 to 29 voted for Trump, completely shattering the conventional wisdom about youth voting patterns. Here's something that really showed how much the political landscape had shifted. Even Chicago, yes, Chicago, started showing cracks in its Democratic armor. Close your eyes and imagine Trump gaining ground in Latino wards in one of the bluest cities in America. When he lost Illinois by just 9 percentage points, political analysts were stunned. This wasn't just a minor shift, it was like watching a political earthquake in slow motion. Think about it, Chicago and Illinois had been Democratic strongholds for generations. Besides, there's one more detail that really puts this comeback in perspective. Trump didn't just win, he dominated in a way Republicans hadn't seen in over 2 decades. By securing both the Electoral College and the popular vote, he pulled off something no Republican president had managed since 2004. That's right, 22 years of Democratic dominance in the popular vote shattered in a single night. But wait, there's more to this political earthquake than just campaign strategies and cultural battles. Let's connect some dots that many people might have missed. Remember Elon Musk's role in all of this? His super PAC poured an incredible $140 million into Trump's campaign, focusing on something old-school politics often overlooks: ground game. We're talking door knockers, phone banks, and yes, even those controversial $1 million daily giveaways in battleground states. Love it or hate it, it changed the game. And here's a detail that often gets overlooked. Trump's campaign wasn't just about winning, it was about winning everywhere. They campaigned in deep blue territories, held rallies in the Bronx, and reached out to Bitcoin enthusiasts, and even promised libertarians a cabinet position. It was like watching a political version of Leave No Stone Unturned. The media landscape played its part too. Remember all those viral stories that seemed to pop up at just the right moment? While some were later debunked, they shaped the narrative in crucial ways. The story about Harris and Biden allegedly diverting hurricane relief funds to undocumented immigrants? It might not have been true, but it hit right when Harris's polling numbers were starting to climb. You know those moments in history that people look back on and say, that's when everything changed? Well, we're living through one right now. The 2024 election didn't just send Trump back to the White House, it completely transformed how power works in Washington. Let's break down this incredible shift that's reshaping American politics. The Republicans not only won the presidency, but also kept their grip on the House of Representatives and secured control of the Senate. In political terms, we call this a trifecta, but in real-world terms, it's like hitting the jackpot 3 times in a row. When NBC News projected that Republicans would maintain control of the House, it wasn't just another headline. It was the final piece of a political puzzle that would change everything. The story in the House is particularly fascinating. Remember when everyone thought the GOP might lose control because of all that chaos and dysfunction last year? Well, talk about a plot twist. Even with a slim majority, Republicans pulled off what Speaker Mike Johnson called a decisive win across the nation. Standing in front of the Capitol, he declared, "We're going to raise an America First banner above this place." Pretty bold words, right? But here's where it gets really interesting. Take Pennsylvania, for example. Republicans didn't just win, they rewrote the political map. They knocked out Representative Matt Cartwright, who'd been holding down his Scranton district since 2013. They even defeated Susan Wild, who's been a Democratic star since flipping her district in 2018. It's like watching a political earthquake reshape the landscape in real time. Now, sure, Democrats had some bright spots. They managed to grab back 3 seats in New York, giving Republicans a run for their money in places like the Hudson Valley and Long Island. But here's the thing. These are small victories in what turned out to be a much bigger Republican story. So, what does this trifecta actually mean for everyday Americans? Well, Republican leaders aren't being shy about their plans. They're talking about massive tax cuts, loosening up rules on oil and gas production, and getting tough on border security. With control of both chambers of Congress and the White House, they've got the power to make these changes happen. Think about it this way. Before, passing major legislation was like trying to play basketball with two teams on defense. Now, Republicans have a clear path to the basket. They're already planning to move quickly on legislation and could fundamentally change how our government works. The real fascinating part, this wasn't just about Trump's comeback or winning a few key races. This was about voters across the country sending a clear message about the direction they want America to take. As one political analyst put it, this isn't just a change in leadership, it's a complete realignment of American political power. So, what does all this mean for the future of American democracy? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? One thing's for sure, though, the political rulebook has been completely rewritten. The old saying goes that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. But maybe in this case, it's more accurate to say that those who can't adapt to change are doomed to be left behind. Remember to hit the subscribe button and share your thoughts below. What do you think was the most surprising aspect of this historic election? And more importantly, where do we go from here? Stay tuned for our next deep dive into what these changes mean for America's future.